What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and it is Wednesday, which means I am doing the third installment of my little series where I break down the roster and check out the different potential possible free agents that are out there, look at some of the names that could be intriguing, as well as draft prospects. And so today I am doing the defensive line. I started on Monday with the secondary, so defensive backs, including safeties and corners. Yesterday I did the linebackers, and today I'm doing defensive line to include defensive tackles and defensive ends. So let's get right into it. Let's take a look at the Dolphins roster as it stands right now. So we have, let's see, first name I'm seeing here is Taco Charlton. He's 25. He's got 3 years in the league. So obviously we got him from the Cowboys. And he is a former first round pick. He's, he's been very underwhelming in his career to this point, especially for a first round pick. He did lead our team in sacks this past season, although, look, at the end of the day with him, he's pretty terrible at setting the edge, right? So there's that. So that very much takes away from him, but as a player, but, even in the pass rush, he wasn't particularly great either. Some of his sacks were definitely cleanup sacks. I talked about that throughout the season. But at the same time, the Dolphins coaching staff just randomly out of nowhere, even though he was another one of those guys that just randomly out of nowhere was put on the inactives list. Now, to be fair, he did battle some injuries later on in the season, but it seemed to me, based off of his designations and the reports and everything that I saw, that he was able to play. They just decided not to, especially in games where, having, some kind of pass rush might actually have helped us to potentially win a game, and they kept him out, which I think the most notable game was, I want to say it was the Bengals game. And they had also kept out Raekwon McMillan for that game. Well, oh, no. They put him on injured reserve right before that game, excuse me. And so, even though, yes, he had an injury, but apparently he had that injury already for a few weeks, was already playing on it for a few weeks, and so they could have shut him down if they really cared about, preserving him and not playing him in meaningless games, which was their excuse. But they decided to do it right before the one game where he was needed the most, and they almost came back to win that game. Anyway, as the player goes, I was never really a huge fan to begin with. I didn't think we should have traded for him. We got rid of Robert Quinn. That was another guy that, a lot of people were down on after his first season with the Dolphins because he didn't produce to the level we would have liked. But I was kind of indifferent. I didn't totally hate getting rid of him just simply because he was expensive or whatever. But with the way that we dismantled the team, we got rid of Robert Quinn, Cameron Wake. I would have kept, out of all the defensive ends, I would have kept the two of them. I would have got rid of Charles Harris over either of those guys. I would have, but I did, agree with getting rid of Andre Branch. He didn't prove to do much of anything and hasn't really since. So, but as you guys know, I would have done things way, way, way different. So I didn't really like that trade to begin with. And look, he appears to be just another failed evaluation done by this coaching staff and front office. And it doesn't look like, to me, it doesn't look like he's going to be much of anything going forward for this team. But who knows? I do think that there's probably at least a likelihood that he's in camp. Next, we have Davon Godchaux, who I really like. I've always been really high on him. He's been in the league now 3 years. He's 25. He came from LSU. I've actually really loved Davon Godchaux since he got picked by Adam Gase. He is an Adam Gase pick. Certainly they began his development, etc., and he's always been a really good player. But the way that we were starting to do it under the Adam Gase regime with the rotation on the defensive line, I thought was great, right? And now a lot of people gave the wide nine like a lot of grief. Now, I admit that you definitely have to have certain players that can, fit that scheme and play it to a high level for it to work, right? You need defensive ends that not only can rush the passer, but they need to be able to set the edge, right? And then you need defensive tackles that are able to, clog up the middle, take up double teams, and just be stalwarts there, right? So they need to, and then, your defensive ends need to be able to push everything back into the middle to those defensive tackles that don't get moved, right? And I thought that, Davon Godchaux and Vincent Taylor and, some of the guys that they were starting to get on that defensive line with Cameron Wake and Robert Quinn, and then, if they would have had another draft under Adam Gase, they wouldn't have had to, do the things that they did, and they probably could have taken, maybe like a top pass rusher in the 2019 draft. Or something, or maybe not even defensive line in the first round. Personally, I would have taken Garrett Bradbury, especially since there was a run on defensive linemen before we got to our pick, and that's actually part of the reason why I disagreed with the Christian Wilkins pick overall. But anyway, we'll get to him in a minute. So I really like Davon Godchaux. He should be around. I don't really think that's a question. He's definitely one of the better defensive tackles that we have, so I would expect that. Then we have Charles Harris. That, to be fair, was also a Gase pick, and it really hasn't panned out to this point. Although we were hoping that he was going to develop into, a Cameron Wake type of player, behind Cameron Wake and coming up behind him and those other guys. But he was also, for the scheme that we were running before. He has had overall, though, in that scheme and the scheme that he played this year under Flores, he's struggled just all around. So it's just looking at this point like, he's not, maybe he could do better somewhere else or something. I don't know, but he's just not really looking like he's translating to the NFL, anywhere near as well as we had hoped that he would. And, he was a Gase pick, but to be fair to him, that happens. Because again, you can't hit on every single one of your picks. And it sucks to be down on one of your first round picks, but then you had Laramie Tunsil and Minkah Fitzpatrick, and that were phenomenal first round picks. And then, at least half your picks in every one of the Gase drafts were hits. And, not just guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick and Laramie Tunsil who are Pro Bowl, all-pro talents, etc. But then you had solid starters and good backups throughout all of those drafts. So they were all really good. But Charles Harris was one, to be fair, that hasn't really panned out to this point. So let's see. Next we have John Jenkins. He's 30 years old, 7 years in the league. So he's interesting, and I think he will end up being around simply because, yes, he is older. Now, we need help everywhere. So having a solid veteran guy, especially someplace that we need help the most, or one of the most depleted, areas, I think the defensive line is the weakest part of, well, matter of fact, I think the trenches are the weakest parts to both offense and defense. And so having a veteran guy who can do some things for you, because, he wasn't spectacular, but he did have some plays here and there. He was okay at setting the edge from what I could tell, and whenever he did or playing the run, when he did have to. But he did make a couple plays, like got into the backfield a few times, whether it was for a sack or a tackle for loss, and I think he might have even had like a pass defensed or two as well. So he did some good things. I would expect him to be in training camp. Of course, I would like to see him in training camp because, again, he's one of the better defensive tackles that we have. And he definitely did some good things and certainly could help bring up the younger guys as well. Then we have defensive end Avery Moss. He's been in the league 2 years. He's 25. He was kind of, he had some flashes and stuff as well. He just needs to be more consistent. I would venture to guess he's going to be in camp because we don't have like any pass rush whatsoever. So trying to develop guys, and he is a young guy that can be brought up and developed still. So, I definitely expect to see more of him. Let's see. Then we have defensive tackle Zach Seiler. He's 2 years in the league. He's 24. Out of like all the waiver wire claims and et cetera that they did, like throughout the entire season, most of them were failures that ended up getting cut or put on injured reserve. Now, to be fair, if they got put on injured reserve, it's not necessarily their fault. Injuries do happen, but it didn't pan out. Or guys that just ended up being like okay or average, like at best. Zach Seiler is one of the guys I would say kind of stuck out the most out of all of those guys. But literally they've built an entire team of like undrafted guys, waiver wire guys, practice squad guys, and yeah, you might get like a gem every once in a while, like him and let's say Vince Beagle. Although Vince Beagle I think's been in 2 or 3 years, so he's still a really young guy, but he's not like a rookie or whatever. I don't know what his draft status was off the top of my head. But anyway, point is though, is that there are a couple guys. So, that's the point. Like that's what happens in training camp, right? Every team does it. They bring in like 15 or 20 undrafted guys, right? To fill out their 90-man roster, and you hope to get 1 or 2 gems. Right? And that happens for every team. Zach Seiler probably, out of all the guys that they brought in, is one of those guys. But again, you can't build an entire team off of undrafted guys, waiver wire guys, practice squad guys, etc., and hope that they're all going to eventually pan out as, hidden gems or whatever. Especially this coaching staff and front office has not proven that they are anywhere near capable enough in their evaluation, player evaluation and talent evaluation to be able to hit that frequently. Then we have Christian Wilkins, who obviously was the rookie first round pick this year. Again, I think that their draft class overall has been underwhelming to be, as nice and fair about it as possible. I disagreed with it for a number of reasons. Obviously, I disagree with the whole reset and the fire sale to begin with. But, and so, if I would have had it my way, and if I would have, frankly, I would have kept Adam Gase, et cetera, and just gave him a fresh, a new year, at least one more year to get it right. And I think that we would have seen the 2016 Dolphins instead of the 2017-2018 Dolphins once they got healthy, etc., and had another draft. So you could have done it way different, so you could have, there was just so many other things that they could have done. Personally, I would have taken Garrett Bradbury in the first round, a defensive lineman in the second round instead of trading for Josh Rosen, and I would have gotten quarterback Will Grier in round 3 to come up behind Ryan Tannehill. But even after everything that they did, then they decided to take Christian Wilkins number 1 overall, or number 13 overall in the first round, after there was like a massive run on all the top talent on the defensive line before they got to number 13. That was the primary area where teams had picked either defensive ends or defensive tackles before the Dolphins picked. The majority of the picks, I think it was like 8 of them or something like that, 7 or 8. And so, you know, I think that they completely, for the most part, completely whiffed on their first draft. Now, to be fair, you still have to give them their full, rookie contracts before you can evaluate these players all individually. But the draft class as a whole, especially after, year one, has looked pretty not good to this point coming out. And so I don't, but as Christian Wilkins as a player, I don't hate him. I think he's a solid player. He came from Clemson. And he did some good things there, but and to be fair, it was just his rookie season, but I don't know that he's ever going to live up to, the kind of, potential and status and stuff that he has and that we were hoping for. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, he was okay. He was just okay this past season, and he certainly does have to be a lot better, but he certainly can. He is a young guy, and we'll have to wait and see how he develops. Then we have, let's see, on a reserve contract, we have Derval Quiros Neto, defensive tackle. He was a rookie this past season, but a rookie at 27 years of age. But that is partly because of, the way, he came up and came into, obviously he came over from Spain and, he was on our practice squad the whole year as an 11th guy because the way he came into the league makes him eligible for the practice squad, but it doesn't take away from the normal 10. It's a little loophole thing. If you get a player from, some other country or something like that, then you can put him on the practice squad as an extra guy. So he has a reserve contract. I mean, he apparently hasn't moved up the ranks at all to this point. So we'll see what goes on with that. Let's see. And then we also have Jonathan Ledbetter, who's on injured reserve. He's a rookie. He's 22 years of age. He had some decent things, some decent plays, and a couple flashes here and there. So, another young guy to be brought up and could potentially, develop into something, and we would certainly hope so. Then we have also another rookie defensive tackle, Gerald Willis, who's 24. Didn't really do anything. But again, another young guy, and we certainly need help on the defensive line. I would expect him to at least be in training camp to, fight for a spot. We also have defensive tackle Kendrick Norton. Technically, he's on the roster. Obviously, we know that he got in a bad car accident and lost his arm, so he's not going to ever play again, but he is technically on the Dolphins roster. I just thought I'd mention that real fast because the Dolphins are helping him through his, so that is good on them to do that, and they definitely should. But he's obviously not ever going to play again, so, and he doesn't count towards, the 53 or any of that. All right, so that's the roster as it currently stands. Let's take a look at some notable free agents. Marcel Darius appears to lead the way, but he, of course, comes with a very large cap number. You have him at $14 million from 2019. Then you have Michael Brockers. These are defensive tackles, by the way, and these are some big names. He comes with an $11 million price tag, and then it starts to drop off from there. Mike Daniels has $8 million price tag. Bo Allen at $5 million. Hey, look, Jordan Phillips is out there, and he's doing great things for the Buffalo Bills, although I would venture to guess that he'll probably end up getting locked up. I mean, I think he had 10 sacks this season or something, which is pretty incredible. Yeah, he had 10 sacks. And he only has a $4.5 million, but he's going to get paid, though, pretty handsomely, I would think. And I doubt that he would come back to the Dolphins. And frankly, even with his production, I still did understand why he was one of the handful of guys that was gotten rid of by Adam Gase and the Dolphins at the time, especially because they had young guys like Devon Godchaux and Vincent Taylor to come up and who were performing well for us. Coming up behind him, so I understood why, because he really was a a diva kind of player, right? He definitely had his moments where he, was seen on the sideline bitching with coaches and stuff because, you know, he wanted to get put in or whatever. And he was also known for, you know, freelancing a little bit and stuff. Anyway, so, but to be fair to him, you know, he's performing really well. It's just we didn't want that kind of personality, especially when we had, you know, it was the same thing like Jay Ajayi and Jarvis Landry, because they were, it's one thing to be an alpha personality. It's another thing to be like a me personality and, like, you know, demand that you get the ball or, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, but he is out there currently. You have Michael Pierce, Shelby Harris, Jack Crawford, Xavier Williams. I mean, a lot of these guys people probably don't really know. You know, and then these price tags really start to get... Damato Pecco's out there, though. Akeem Spence. I really liked him personally, but Timmy Jernigan, these guys are all pretty, you know, low in cap, or would be low in cap hit in price. So you could take, you know, a chance on these guys. Sylvester Williams. Obviously, defensive tackle's not like Michael Bennett's out there. Yeah, anyway. So, you know, it's not a sexy position. So the names are not typically as household as, you know, some of the other names that are out there. But, you know, that's probably an area where the Dolphins could supplement in free agency and get some, you know, decent upside players, you know, that don't cost a lot. And we definitely, that would probably be the better way to go. Although you definitely also need to pick, you know, like one or two guys in the draft as well. And you definitely need to get a defensive end. I mean, I certainly would hit defensive tackle or defensive line, excuse me, you know, early in the draft. You know, for this upcoming draft, I would use our first 3 picks on, I would say, an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, and then either like a running back or maybe a tight end or maybe like a linebacker. Anyway, and then for defensive ends, Jadeveon Clowney is again available, although he had already said he doesn't want to come to Miami. Who knows if that would change, but he is also really expensive. His 2019 hit was $15 million. Everson Griffin comes in after that. He is old, or getting old. He's 32, $14.5 million there for him. And Ndamukong Suh's listed as a defensive end for some reason, which is weird. But I doubt he would come back too, and I frankly wouldn't want him. Ezekiel Ansah, that's an interesting name. He's gotten a $9 million cap hit. Jabal Sheard, $8.5 million. Michael Bennett, 8.37. Gerald McCoy, $8 million. Robert Quinn, $8 million. Leonard Williams, Vic Beasley, Jason Pierre-Paul, Shaq Lawson, Eric Armstead, Vinnie Curry, Quentin Jefferson, Adrian Claiborne. I mean, Brandon Copeland. I mean, there's Emmanuel Ogbah. There's tons of names out there. And especially as you, like, Emmanuel Ogbah is only 1.6 million, right? So, Adrian Claiborne, 2 million. Emmanuel Ogbah is only 26 as well, right? So, like, there's definitely names out there. It looks like at, you know, defensive end, there's actually quite a few guys that you can pick up. So it looks like, and for pretty cheap. So, I mean, it looks like based off of that, you might want to try and hit free agency for defensive end and try and get some of those young guys, like Emmanuel Ogbah, who's 26 and has like a 1.6 million cap hit, and try and, you know, get some young talent that's relatively cheap for defensive end, and then maybe hit defensive tackle in the draft, since it seems like free agency is probably a bit thinner at defensive tackle than it is defensive end. So real quick, let's take a look at just some of the top prospects for the draft. At defensive line, or, you know, defensive tackle, you have the top defensive tackle according to CBS. Again, that's where I'm getting my information from their big board. Their top defensive tackle is Derek Brown. He's their 5th overall ranked player. Then Javon Kinlaw comes in next from South Carolina. Neville Gallimore from Oklahoma. Notre Dame tackle Julian Akwara, and Alabama's Raekwon Davis round out the top 5 defensive linemen according to CBS. And edge rushers, they have Chase Young, obviously. He's the number 1 overall player and expected to go number 2 overall right now to the Washington Redskins. Then you have AJ Epineza from Iowa, Yetur Gross-Matos from Penn State, Clavon Chaisson from LSU. By the way, I apologize to any of these guys for fucking up their names. And Curtis Weaver from Boise State. So, I mean, unless we could get Chase Young, I would say probably, like I said, the better balance would be to maybe try and get defensive ends, young, cheap, young and talented but cheap defensive ends in free agency, and then use the draft to get defensive linemen. But I mean, maybe like a guy like Yetur Gross-Matos. He's the 18th overall player for them, and we pick at number 18. So maybe he would be a good guy to take with the 18th overall pick. Maybe then with, pick number 5, you take an offensive lineman and then get maybe like a running back with pick number 26. But, again, we'll have to wait and see how it plays out, but I expect them to actually trade up and go get a quarterback, which I think is going to end up being a disaster, but we'll see how it pans out. And so anyway, that's what I got for you guys on the defensive line. Like I said, I think that overall on the defense, it's probably the weakest area. We probably would be better off trying to get some of the young talent that's cheap in free agency, since it appears that there are going to be a lot of names out there that have high upside that you could take, chances on and not have to pay very much. And then you have, the draft is where I would probably look more for your defensive tackles. And we do have, we do have some young guys that I do like, like Devon Godshaw. Christian Wilkins had a, okay year at best, but he is a young guy that could certainly develop. And, we have 1 or 2 veterans as well that can help bring those guys along, like John Jenkins, and that can also do some good things for you. So, we'll see how it goes into training camp, who's around, and then who ends up shaking out onto the final 53. Alright guys, with that I'm going to get out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Phins up.